evening, everyone. This is the second episode of Mondo Audio A Go-Go. My back is not quite the painful structure of agony that it was, so I'm going to try and go through a short read from The Big Book of Vice. Highly recommended, published by Piranha Press. I believe it's out of print, but can probably be found from various online book retailers or comic shops. So, this chapter is called The Poppy's Strange Fruits. Humanity has known the poppy and its intoxicating effects for millennia, but its products, opium, morphine, and heroin, continue to baffle society. Opium is a narcotic made from the sap of a type of poppy. The name comes from a Greek word for plant juice. The ancient Greeks considered opium a cure-all. They also used it recreationally in cakes and candies. Because of the drowsiness opium induces, the poppy was associated with Morpheus, the god of dreams, and Thanatos, the god of death. Under Alexander the Great, the Greeks spread opium to Persia and India. Opium became popular in the Islamic world since the Quran forbade alcohol. Arab physicians gave the earliest known description of opium addiction around 1000 AD. In 1680, noted English doctor Thomas Sydenham introduced a combination of opium and spices in wine he called laudanum. But Sydenham found that the mixture could also be addictive, and in 1805, Frederick Sertuna isolated opium's key compound. He called it morphium after the god Morpheus and won the Nobel Prize for it in 1831. Many artists of the day sought inspiration through opiates. Samuel Taylor Coleridge claimed he composed his most famous poem in an opium dream. In 1840, New Englanders brought over 25,000 pounds of opium into the US. Noting the volume of the trade, US Customs established an import duty. Prior to anesthetics, the most common surgery was amputation. Strong men held the patient down while the doctor worked as quickly as possible. The hypodermic syringe, perfected in 1853, provided a more effective way to administer morphine than oral use. The new opiates gave physicians time to work, making modern surgery possible. Morphine was widely used during the Civil War, the Prussian-Austrian War, and the Franco-Prussian War. But addiction often resulted, a condition known as soldier's disease. In 1874, physicians at London's St Mary's Hospital created a highly concentrated opiate, approximately 6 times stronger than morphine. Manufactured by the Bayer Company, the new drug was named heroin due to its heroic power to relieve pain. It was sold over the counter as a cough remedy. Bayer's other new wonder drug, aspirin, required a prescription. Morphine and heroin were used to treat alcoholism, and it was even believed that heroin could cure morphine addiction. Clearly, opiates were not very well understood at the time. Opiates are a depressant, slowing body functions and causing drowsiness. They affect the body's endorphins receptors, and blocking pain and causing a sense of well-being. Heroin at first triggers a brief euphoric rush, but the user's tolerance quickly increases, requiring escalating doses to achieve the same effect. If use of heroin is stopped, withdrawal symptoms soon begin, including nausea, diarrhea, and body pains. Too large a dose can depress the respiratory system to a fatal extent. The first American anti-drug law, enacted in San Francisco in 1875, outlawed only smoking opium, something practiced mainly by Chinese immigrants. In the 1890s, tabloids owned by William Randolph Hearst ran an anti-drug campaign that played up the fear of the yellow peril. Meanwhile, opiates in other forms could be purchased in any drugstore. Syringe kits were even advertised in the Sears catalogue. Many patent medicines contained as much as 50% morphine, and laudanum was cheaper than beer or wine. By 1900, 75% of opiate addicts were women. Most began using drugs for female complaints, often under doctors' orders. The law that most reduced addiction was not a criminal statute, but the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act. Strict testing and labelling soon took most patent medicines off the market. With the US embroiled in the politics of the opium trade, the 1914 Harris Narcotics Act sought to regulate drug use with strict tax and license requirements. The law did allow a doctor to prescribe drugs in the course of his professional practice, but authorities soon decided this didn't include giving drugs to maintain an addiction. Apologies, my main light just switched off. Makes it a bit more difficult for me to read. Sorry about that. 2 seconds. And we have light again. The law did allow a doctor to prescribe drugs in the course of his professional practice, but authorities soon decided this didn't include giving drugs to maintain an addiction. Over the next 25 years, as many as 25,000 physicians were arrested, 3,000 went to prison, and thousands had their license revoked. Drugs became an increasingly urban problem as addicts moved to the larger cities where black markets existed, but those sources were expensive and unreliable. The health, behaviour and social status of addicts declined quickly as many turned to crime to pay for their habits, and they began to fill mental asylums and prisons. Authorities blamed the deterioration of addicts on increased use of heroin over morphine, though there is little difference in the medical effects of the two. In 1924, all manufacture of heroin was banned. Again, papers ran scare stories of the effects of narcotics on racial minorities and their horrible crimes against innocent whites. Not one of the stories used to promote the early drug laws can be substantiated. By the 1930s, some began to question the draconian approach. Berkeley Police Chief August Vollmer said. The quote is from Police Chief August Vollmer. Vigorous prosecution of addicts and peddlers has proved not only useless and enormously expensive, but is also unjustifiably and unbelievably cruel. Some countries allowed medical maintenance or the substitution of the less potent drug methadone. This reduced habit-supporting theft, and many users were able to lead normal lives, although the addiction remained. But most Americans believed they needed strong laws to protect them from drug-crazed minorities, and the underground heroin trade grew increasingly profitable. In the 50s and 60s, the US market was dominated by Corsican gangsters. Turkish opium was refined in Marseille and then smuggled into New York, as seen in the fact-based movie The French Connection. In Vietnam, many war-weary soldiers tried heroin usage, which soared at home as GIs came back from opium-rich Southeast Asia. During the war, US intelligence supplied weapons to anti-communist warlords, who also controlled opium production in the Golden Triangle of Laos, Thailand and Burma. In the mid-60s, the CIA set up Air America to fly opium from Burma and Laos, much of it coming to the US via missile. In the mid-60s, the CIA set up Air America to fly opium from Burma and Laos. Most of it came to the US via Marseille. The number of heroin users peaked at around 750,000 in the late 1960s. In 1970, Janis Joplin died of an overdose. Her death and others like it raised awareness of heroin's dangers. With the end of the war, the use was declining. In the 1980s, users encountered a new hazard, AIDS, which was spread through shared needles. But in the 1990s, South American coke cartels began pushing heroin as a new cash crop. Heroin chic flourished briefly in fashion ads and movies like Trainspotting and Pulp Fiction. Global heroin production has risen about 30% since the early 90s, and about half of the total of that is consumed in the US. 10% of addicts die each year, but the supply of replacements continues unabated. So there you go. That was a chapter from the Big Book of Vice, out of print but available from most good comic shops who will look it up and find you a copy should you ask. That was the second chapter of Mondo Audio A Go-Go. If you want to help me carry on making videos like this and basic survival, then please consider subscribing to my Patreon, where you don't receive anything but the fact that you've helped me stay alive for another month. So thank you very much. The link to the Patreon will be in the link in the YouTube discussion-y thing. I don't know what the terminology is, sorry, but the link will be there nonetheless. Thank you very much, and give this a like if you enjoyed it. Cheers, have a good night, talk to you soon.